Alrighty, hi. There we
Hi.
go. You made it.
I made it. My first Instagram live.
Woohoo! I am so honored. I'm so honored to have you. That's exciting. How's your day going?
Good. It's going well.
Good,
Ah,
good, good. So I was just saying we're all in for a treat to hear about all things teen sleep and really looking forward to learning from you. I'm already a big fan of your work. And so we could start by having you just introduce yourself to our audience.
sure. Yeah. So my name is Dr. Cara Ooi, and I am trained as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, as well as a sleep physician. And right now, I primarily do sleep medicine. So I work in the community, and I do general sleep medicine. But then I also have a practice specifically for teens and teens and young adults with insomnia, a lot of body clock issues or sleep timing issues. And I have created a program for the teens and young adults called the Decoding Insomnia program.
Awesome. We're definitely going to hear more about that program. I think it sounds really exciting and so much needed. So what is the perfect storm for insomnia in teens? Let's just jump right in.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, so I think we can kind of think about it a few different ways. There's the obvious stuff that I think we all know about, obviously electronics and the internet and the importance, I think, especially in the teen years of being connected. It's very, very difficult to step away from all of that. And then also, I think we have to remember all of the money that's invested in terms of keeping all of our attention online, but especially the teens. And then also the stage of life, right? It's a really stressful time. A lot of mental health issues tend to arise in the teen years, especially now during the pandemic. That's a huge issue. And there's just also, in that stage of life, it's a time when people are wanting a lot of freedom and independence, and sleep is just often not top of the list. So there's that stuff I think we all know about. And then there's kind of the vicious cycles that can get set up in the teen years. So a lot of people know that teens tend to run later in terms of the timing of their clocks. So they'll tend to be night owls. They like to go to bed later. They like to wake up later. But that clashes with when they have to go to school. So what ends up happening is that most teens are kind of very, very sleep deprived, and then that sets them up to do things like nap after school and sleep in on the weekends. And then those behaviors, unfortunately, then drive more insomnia because they tend to shift the clock back later or make it hard for their bodies to get sleepy at the right time. So I often see these teens who are just, especially 2-3 months into school, are so sleep deprived and have just gotten really, really stuck in this vicious cycle where they're not sleeping much, and so then they have to do all these things to catch up on sleep, and that drives even more problems. So I can comment more on that, like exactly how that plays out in the teen years, but I would say all of that stuff comes together to just make it very hard for most teens to get enough sleep, and oftentimes drives a lot of insomnia.
Yeah, that is so true. And I love how you kind of broke it down. So the way I see it, and that's something I tend to tell my moms as well, moms of teenagers, about the fact that your teen is not just being lazy or moody or cry. Well, sometimes they are, but there's a lot that's going on within that teen. And, if you look at those, the environmental factors like you listed out, and sort of those behavioral factors and the things that they want to do and things that they would prefer to do. And then, the physical pieces of it, like, changes that they're undergoing, their later body clocks and things like that. I don't know what it's like in Canada, but here in the US, we also have another contributor to that perfect storm, which is the early school start times. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you guys have that too?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, in some ways, that's a bit better now during the pandemic. At least where I'm in Ontario, we had many, many weeks of school closures. We're actually just coming out of another 2 weeks. Okay. So in some ways, that was good because there was less pressure on the system. They could sleep a little bit later, more until maybe 8 or 9. But yes, many of the teens that I see typically have to wake up at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, and that can be 2-3 hours before their body actually wants to wake up. And if they've shifted onto a later schedule, which many, many teens have, because of our access to light and screens and all of that, it might be even more than that. They might be waking up 4, 5, 6 hours before their body actually thinks it's time to wake up.
Yeah, yeah, that is so true. So yeah, same here. I mean, school starts at 7 or so, and so they have to wake up at 5:30, 6 a.m. To be able to hop on the bus. And sometimes the way the way I kind of compare this too is like as a parent, because they're waking up right when they're the sleepiest, just based on their circadian rhythm. And so it's almost like us being asked to wake up at 3 a.m. or something to
Mm-hmm.
solve some complex
Yeah.
problems, and they're going to school. And so definitely a problem that we're faced with. And we need societal changes, we need systemic changes to be able to get that better. But then there are other things that we can do as a community, that we can do as parents, that our teenagers can do, which will help, and that will go into as well. And even for this particular episode, I would say if you do have a teenager in your life, please share it with them. I think they're going to learn a lot about the things that they can actually put into place. So they're not blaming the school system, but they can make some changes on their own, which will kind of get them on the right path for sleep success. I would love it, Dr. Ooi, to talk about how some of these specifics that you listed actually contribute to that storm. So let's talk about the internet, the electronics, and how it's a contributor to that perfect storm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So there's a few different ways. I mean, obviously, we know that when we're online, that's pretty fun. It's pretty engaging. Makes it really hard for us to wind down, power down, so that we're actually ready for sleep. And then there's also the fact that you're getting light from the screen. So LED back screens from our phones and our tablets, that light actually suppresses melatonin production. It makes it hard for us to get sleepy. It can actually contribute to difficulties with the sleep quality. And it also can shift the clock later. So as we already talked about, teens like to run later at baseline, but there's all these different ways that you can shift the timing of your clock later. And that happened a lot during the school closures. I'm not sure if you saw this too, but I saw many, many teens where they were completely flipped around. They were sleeping during the day and then up all night. And so, I mean, electronics are huge, right? It's a really, really difficult thing that contributes to sleep issues in the teen years and in the adult years as well.
Yep, absolutely. So two ways. So it's the light suppressing the melatonin, and then just that really increased arousal. Sometimes you'll have that group chat where you're in and you get that text, and that text will keep you seething for 30 minutes to an hour while you're in bed. So really creating that increased stimulation that then makes it hard for your body to quiet down. So that's really, really helpful. And it's important because one of the things that some of the teens I work with would say would be, well, I use the blue light blocking glasses, or I put the filters on my phone. I'm like, that's one piece, which is good, right? It's good that you're doing that, but it's that other piece of really getting your mind to quiet down, and the devices and things like that really make it hard to do so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how about, you talked about the stage of life, delayed body clock. Can you just shed some light on that? I just always find that so fascinating. And I think families really don't really get it. And so it would be helpful to just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So we know that in puberty, there's a natural delay by about 2 hours in the timing of the clock. So say if when they were kids, they wanted to go to sleep at 9 p.m., wake up at, say, 6 or 7 a.m., there's a natural shift where most teens, their bodies naturally want to go to bed maybe at 11 p.m. or 12 and wake up maybe at 9 or so. That actually is quite rare, I would say, at least in my practice to see. I would say most teens are on a schedule where their bodies want to be sleeping between maybe 1 o'clock and 10 a.m., right? And that's because of the ability of the clock to shift, of the rhythm to shift because of light. And also because of sleeping in on the weekends, right? So when you sleep in, that also signals to the clock that it's time to shift. So that's part of that vicious cycle that I was mentioning, because so many teens are very, very sleep deprived. And they have to sleep in when they can, which makes sense on one hand, but then it also works against them because the clock shifts later as well. So yeah, it's a huge thing that I see in my practice. And obviously there are other things that contribute to insomnia, but it often is one that kind of the big one that has to be addressed. I will often say to a lot of my teens, I think a big part of your problem is that your body's on Hawaii time. And In Toronto, that's 5 hours behind. It's not unusual at all. Sometimes I see I'll see teens who I'll say, it's like your body's in Australia or in Japan, and they get it right away because that's their experience, right? They're just not sleepy at 12, 1, sometimes even 2. And then they're kind of like a zombie if they wake up until 11 or 12 or 1 p.m. There's another part of that too, actually, that's really important to know about, which is the forbidden zone. So there is a period before your body thinks it's time to sleep where actually you're at that peak alertness. And so a lot of people talk about how they get a second wind. That's when they get really creative and they want to start kind of, doing all sorts of stuff at that time. And that's actually just a natural part of the rhythm, which for adults, for sleeping from 11 or so until whenever, that's fine because that occurs at 8 or 9 p.m. But for the teens, that's happening at 12, 1 or 2, and it's right when they're trying to sleep. So it's this perfect setup. They try to go to bed and they're just not sleepy at all. And in fact, they're very, very alert. And then it just drives all sorts of other issues because then they lie awake in bed and they get anxious and frustrated, pull out their phones because they're bored. So, yeah.
It does. I definitely can see it really how it all just weaves into that storm, right? Definitely see it. So we talked about, some of this, like, I guess, behavior. We talked a little bit about electronics. How about like kind of like the habits and things like that? So apart from just the devices, so caffeine and the things they eat and things like that they're doing, that's also impacting their sleep.
Yeah, I think all of the same stuff that applies to adults as well plays out in the teen years. I think maybe something different or that's unique about the teen years is that by virtue of their age and how many years they've been on the planet, they also haven't necessarily had the time and the experience to build up those healthy habits. And also there's that kind of the idea of where you are in the teen years, where oftentimes there is that invincibility and kind of that need for freedom and not liking to be, liking things to be too regimented. So I think that all contributes to oftentimes, teens not having habits that are helpful and again, just not having had the time or the experience yet to have built those habits. Or the want to.
I know. And, I in addition to just this, essentially what you're getting is your body clock is later, right? You have a delayed rhythm. So you're not going to bed until later. You have all these gadgets that you're trying to kind of appease your racing mind because you're frustrated and all that. And then you have to wake up early, in the morning because you have to go to school. Think about it. And so then you're pretty much functioning on about 4 to 5 hours of sleep, which is grossly inadequate since we expect that our teens are getting anywhere from 8 to 10 ideally. And then how about the weekends? How about that teen that says, well, it is what it is. I have, AP classes. I have all the sports I'm involved in. I'm in the debate club and I have a job. And so literally, I'm just going to focus on catching up on the weekends. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's tricky because I think in the past I used to be quite, maybe dogmatic about saying, you can't sleep in on the weekends, but it's more knowing what the trade-off is. So sleeping in on the weekends makes sense on one hand because yes, there's this huge buildup of sleep debt during the week, and the weekends you want to have some freedom to sleep in because it's nice, your friends aren't awake, so what are you going to do anyways? Yeah. And you're catching up and it's more aligned with your body rhythm, right? Your circadian rhythm. So there's all of these good reasons to do that. However, the cost, as I mentioned, is that when you sleep in on the weekends, it can kind of perpetuate or actually push the clock later. And so then that's where you get into that vicious cycle where, you're tired and then you sleep in and then you can't sleep and then you're more tired. And so it just fuels itself. So that oftentimes I find within 2-3 months of after school started, people have dug themselves into such a hole that it's very difficult to reverse those patterns unless you really do kind of a reset and you really throw a bunch of your sleep at the same time.
Yep. Yeah. So this is really helpful. So now we've cooked up this storm. Why does it eventually cause insomnia? Because insomnia is one thing, and then sleep deprivation is another thing. And a lot of what we're talking about has sort of led into a situation where your teen is sleep deprived. But how does all this then perpetuate like insomnia?
That's such a good question. I don't always think about it that way because all of the people I'm seeing have insomnia.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's such a great question. So there's a bunch of different ways. I think one of them is that because the clock is running later, because there's napping to catch up on sleep, and that makes it hard to get sleepy at the right time. A very, very common reason why people experience insomnia is that they're trying to sleep when they don't have any potential for sleep. So at 10 o'clock, if you're getting into bed, that's a good thing to do. It's well-meaning. But if your body doesn't think it's time to sleep until 1 or 2 or 3 o'clock, either because your clock has shifted or you've napped, right, because you haven't been able to build up that pressure for sleep, then that can really set you up for insomnia simply because there's no potential for sleep. But also because what ends up happening is then you get anxious, you get frustrated, and that can then fuel a lot of that hyperarousal that you mentioned that drives insomnia. Another really big one is all of that time spent awake trying to sleep actually creates a very negative association with the bed. And so essentially what happens is that people become trained to associate bed with that state of being more alert. And oftentimes it's combined with a really busy mind or feeling tense and anxious. And so over time, the bed actually becomes a cue or a trigger for that state. And that's a huge, huge factor that drives insomnia. So those are kind of the ways in which sleep deprivation can then lead into insomnia.
Excellent. I love it. I love it. Yeah, I know you always wonder, of course, by the time you and I are seeing, these kids, they're at the they've been struggling with this for months, years even, but really looking at where did it all start? And you can see where it all starts, right? The changes, the environmental, the physiological changes, the societal demands that's placed on them. And all of a sudden here they are. And we're not going to go into too much detail. We're planning to keep this nice and short about the consequences of it, right? On their mood, their performance, their learning, the executive function, so much. And I'm sure most of you that are here are going to watch up, probably tuning in because you either have a relative or a child, or you are someone who's struggling with it and you already are feeling those negative impacts too. So that being said, we're going to end this on a super positive note. What are some tips that you would recommend that could get us out of that, or get our teens out of that perfect storm?
Yeah. And before I answer that question, I'm realizing I'm not being a very kind of good psychiatrist because I didn't talk about the mental health piece at all, and how the lack of sleep can drive those difficulties, which of course then drive insomnia. And there's a lot more to that I just did want to mention that, of course, that's
I think we're going to need to have you come back. So because that's like a whole big piece in and of itself, right?
Yeah. So you'd asked me about tips. So I guess, first of all, I will mention that I have a lot of resources that I can point people towards, but I have kind of 3 main tips that I always start with for everybody. So for the first tip is actually that idea of knowing when to sleep, when you're going to have the potential for sleep. So just understanding the current timing of your clock and when you can expect to have enough of that buildup of sleepiness. So depending on when you woke up, depending on when you nap, that's all going to dictate when your body's going to be ready for sleep. So my first tip is always actually, you need to know what's going on there, and then you don't want to try to sleep before that because it's just a setup for insomnia. And that downward spiral of frustration, anxiety, which then tends to fuel insomnia more. My second tip is actually to set up your light situation properly, because that's one that is fairly low-hanging fruit. It doesn't take too much effort. It doesn't require you to necessarily change habits or require willpower, but can make such a huge difference. So yes, if you can put away the electronics an hour or 2 beforehand, that's great. But I would say, at least for the teens I see, that's not realistic. So there are a lot of different ways that you can reduce the harm. You already mentioned the filters is one. I like to recommend blue light blocking glasses, but there's a ton of other things that you can do to just reduce that impact of light, particularly in the evening. And then also on the flip side, you want to make sure you're getting lots of that light in the morning, and sunlight is the best type of light to get in the morning to help anchor the clock, signal the clock the day has started. And then my third tip has to do with that negative association that I described before. So I would actually say that, at least in my practice, when I see people after the fact and they're sleeping better, they always tell me that addressing that negative association made the biggest difference. So if they can retrain themselves to stay out of bed, not get into bed until sleepy, we call that stimulus control, that is the most powerful of the interventions I find. Now, it's very tricky to do that consistently. And so my third tip is actually to not necessarily start with that, but to start with setting up another place that you can be. right? You need to have a place that in the moment is going to be realistic for you to go to. I know that when I don't have that place set up for myself, like if I'm away somewhere, a hotel or something like that, I will stay in bed and just lie in bed if I'm struggling to fall asleep. And so you really need a good alternate plan that's going to be just as appealing in the moment. So I call it a cozy nook. And I also encourage people to set up a little sleep kit so that they have stuff on hand to do, so they're not scrambling around to find stuff to do in the moment, so that you can kind of give your mind a task until you feel sleepy, and then you get into bed at that point.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love it. I love it. So know when you're more likely to sleep. And then, the light piece is huge, because that's one of our strongest cues for our bodies and for sleep. And also really stimulus control is what we call it, but sleep, move to bed when you're most likely to fall asleep, when you're more likely to be successful with that feed. I love it. Now, if you have these are great. I think these are excellent ways to get started. And most of the time, you can achieve success with this, and that's awesome. And I see that you've mentioned some elements of cognitive behavioral therapy, for instance, which is really the bedrock and really the foundation for treating insomnia in adults, and also actually now we're doing it a lot more in children. So can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So CBTI, as you mentioned, I love the great treatment. It's a very, very effective treatment that we often will get pieces of it in sleep hygiene handouts and education around sleep. But there's a bit more to it, or there's a lot more to it, and it's a very, very effective treatment, and it's quite quick. So a typical course of CBTI is 4 sessions, normally spread out every 2 weeks. And sometimes you can see change within a week or two. So compared to CBTI for mood, anxiety, it really is a much faster win, which is great, especially in the teen years, right, where it's much more common to get distracted and derailed if you're not seeing progress quickly. In my experience, though, I've found that some teens, or a small subset of teens, will benefit from more traditional CBTI, but many of them don't. Like they just can't do it consistently enough in order to get over. There's a beginning phase, maybe for 2-3 weeks, where things actually get worse before they get better. And so oftentimes it's just too long, and people can't quite sustain the consistency that they need to be able to see the benefit. And so they kind of stop here, and then that reinforces the idea that they're never going to sleep better and nothing's going to help, which is such a huge part of why people struggle as well with being able to get their sleep on track. So that is where I've done a lot of work to try to figure out how to bring the benefit of CBTI to teens in a way that they can actually digest it and that they're actually going to be able to act on it. So a lot of that, you've already brought up the fact that the idea of habits in the teen years, they haven't yet been able to establish that. There's a lot of, the identity of teens butting up against that too. And so that's where I've tried to really incorporate a few different things in the program that I've created.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, I love it. So that's a great segue to your program. Can you tell us a little bit about it? Because now we've gotten people saying, okay, awesome. We're ready to establish healthy sleep for our teens. Where do we get started?
I have to say it's still a work in progress. I'm just piloting the first version of the program right now with a small group of teens and their families. And actually it's a program for teens and young adults, but it's actually a program for both kind of the teens and young adults as well as their parents, because I find that parents they can make or break kind of the outcome of treatment. When a parent is involved, it's so helpful because they can really help to drive things along, and they have that connection and they're there day to day. But you probably also know, of course, that sleep tends to be a really huge point of contention between teens and parents. And so oftentimes you can get this dynamic where the parents are really pushing and the teen's not there yet. And so then, what often happens is that everybody digs in their heels and things tend to fall apart. So the program itself is based on CBTI. I've incorporated some other strategies from acceptance and commitment therapy, which I think really helps with, there's a focus on helping to define why sleep matters to them. And I also use it, I kind of wrap it up into a daily practice to help them build skills around how to process all the thoughts that are showing up at nighttime, and learn ways of being able to relax their body and their mind. So it's all delivered in online videos, but then there's also group support for both the participants, so the teens and young adults, as well as for the parents, because they also need, I think they also need a lot of support too, or can benefit from a lot of support.
Awesome. So where do we find all that work?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's decodeinsomnia.com. I just set up an Instagram account. So I could do this with you. So that's also at Decode Insomnia. And I've got a bunch of different resources. So I have a jumpstart kit on there that speaks to the 3 things that you asked me about. I also have a podcast series that I put together. So it's a 13-episode series with short little bite-sized 10-minute episodes that go through a lot of the key information and some, the strategies that I like to recommend to my patients. And yeah, I think those are the main places to find me. So my website and Instagram now.
That's awesome. And it sounds like there's loads of stuff on there. This has been great. I think I talked to you about this as well. So for those of you who are not already following Dr. Ooi, go right there and go follow her on Decoding Insomnia, as well as check out her website. And then also it turns out, we're both passionate about helping teens sleep. So I do have the Sleep in Teens course, which is live. It's an on-demand course with a years or lifetime membership, actually, where teens actually have this videos and also workbook with journal prompts that they can really walk through establishing healthy sleep for themselves. So may not necessarily be to the point where they need to see a sleep specialist yet, but really establishing those healthy habits, because once those habits are established, then the likelihood that they're much more successful, especially if you consider the perfect storm they're in, they have a higher likelihood of success. So do check it out, restfulsleepmd.com/courses. And also, just continue to follow us both on Instagram. We're going to be having a lot of fun things to share with you. And I think this has been great. I've learned a ton just hearing about your work more, and I'm even much more inspired. Do you have any last words for our audience?
So I actually forgot to also mention that I do have a couple webinars coming up. So if you're wanting more information to find out, I think on February 10th and 28th, and you can find all that information on my website. And I guess the last thing I'd like to say is that oftentimes we believe that teens just can't sleep better because of all that perfect storm that we talked about, but they can. And I've seen it so many times, and it's so life-changing. It really can change the trajectory of their lives when they're sleeping, when they're sleeping better. So I think I also just want to leave people not with a sense of hopelessness, even though it is a situation, it is very fixable, and you can see change quite quickly.
That's beautiful. Yes, there is hope. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and we're here to help. Their sleep issues, of course, don't end in the first year of life or the second year or early schooling. They do have sleep issues that come up when they hit adolescence, but that's what we're here for. So this has been awesome. It's been just such a joy to chat with you. And so I guess we'll see you all next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye.